It was a bright Saturday morning in Brooksville, and 12-year-old Melvin was cruising on his skateboard toward Market Point, the local grocery store his dad, Mr. Wood, owned. The sun was high, and Melvin was in a good mood. Thinking about his plans for the day, nothing could ruin it, or so he thought. Melvin's dad wasn't one to flaunt his success. He worked hard to build Market Point from the ground up, and most people in town didn't even know Mr. Wood owned it. He liked to keep things simple. Melvin didn't care about all that. He was just a kid looking to grab a candy bar and some juice. As he strolled through the aisles, something caught his eye. A police officer, Officer Susan Bryant, was watching him. She was new to Brooksville, and Melvin had heard some people say she had a stern reputation, always quick to judge. But Melvin wasn't worried. He had nothing to hide. As Melvin approached the register, Officer Bryant stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Hey you," she called. "What do you think you're doing?" Melvin froze. Just buying some candy and juice, ma'am," he said, confused. She scowled at him. "You think you can just take whatever you want?" she demanded, grabbing his wrist. Melvin's heart skipped a beat. He was just a kid, and now, in front of everyone, he felt the fear crawl up his spine. I'm not stealing. I've got money," he stammered. But Officer Bryant wasn't listening. "Shoplifting, huh?" she muttered, shaking her head. The murmurs of a few onlookers filled the air, and Melvin felt his face burn with embarrassment. "I swear I'm not stealing," he pleaded, but she ignored him. Officer Bryant marched him toward the exit, his skateboard forgotten on the floor behind him. Just as things seemed to spiral out of control, Mrs. Thompson, the store manager, noticed the scene. She had worked for Mr. Wood for years, and she knew Melvin well. "Officer, what's going on here?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Bryant's response was cold. "This boy was caught shoplifting. He thinks he can get away with it," she sneered. Mrs. Thompson stepped in, her eyes soft with sympathy. "I know him. He's not like that. This is a mistake." But Officer Bryant wasn't interested in listening. "Ma'am, stay out of it," she snapped, dragging Melvin outside. Melvin was stunned. What had he done to deserve this? He stayed quiet, hoping someone would step in. That's when he saw his dad's car pull up, a sleek black vehicle that seemed to glide through the chaos. Mr. Wood stepped out, his calm demeanor hiding the storm brewing in his eyes. Without a second thought, Mr. Wood walked toward Officer Bryant, his voice steady but firm. "Excuse me, officer. I believe you have my son." Officer Bryant barely looked up. "Stay back, sir. This boy's been caught shoplifting." Melvin's eyes met his father's, and Mr. Wood gave him a reassuring nod. "I'm Mr. Wood, the owner of Market Point," he said, his voice cool. "This is my son, and I can assure you he wasn't stealing." A few people had gathered, watching. Officer Bryant didn't seem convinced. "Anyone can claim to own a store," she muttered, still holding Melvin's arm tightly. Mr. Wood didn't flinch. He calmly pulled out his wallet and showed her his ID. "I've owned this store for 10 years, built it from nothing. If my son says he didn't steal, I believe him." Bryant's face turned red with embarrassment, but instead of letting Melvin go, she sneered. "Kids these days think they're above the law," she muttered. Mr. Wood didn't raise his voice. "I understand you're doing your job, but there's been no crime here. My son doesn't deserve to be treated like this." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Officer Bryant, clearly uncomfortable, finally released her grip on Melvin. "Fine," she said, "but I'll be watching him." Melvin, shaken but relieved, looked up at his father. Mr. Wood placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Go inside with Mrs. Thompson," he said softly, and Melvin quickly retreated into the store. Outside, Mr. Wood turned to Officer Bryant one last time. "This isn't how we treat people in Brooksville. Everyone deserves respect." Officer Bryant only scoffed, but as she climbed into her car, she couldn't shake the feeling of the crowd's eyes on her. She felt the weight of their judgment. The next day, Melvin's dad got a call. The chief of the police department had heard about the incident and wanted to speak with Officer Bryant. She had some explaining to do. Later that afternoon, Officer Bryant showed up at Market Point. Melvin tensed when he saw her, but Mr. Wood put a hand on his shoulder, calming him. "Mr. Wood, Melvin," Officer Bryant said, her voice quieter than usual. "I came to apologize. I was wrong to accuse you of stealing. I shouldn't have treated you like that." Melvin glanced at his father, unsure how to respond. Mr. Wood nodded, calm as always. "Thank you, officer. It's important to admit when we make a mistake." As Officer Bryant left the store, she knew this was just the beginning of her journey to earn the town's trust. She'd learned the hard way that respect had to be earned, not demanded. And Melvin? He had learned something too. His father's strength didn't come from anger or power, but from patience and wisdom. And from that moment on, Melvin knew he was protected, not just by his dad's love, but by the courage to stand up for what's right. And that's how a simple trip to the store turned into a life lesson for both of them.